Hello, 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 everybody. I hope you enjoyed the bonus episode that I gave you last week about Halloween. I figured that would be a nice little treat, and I think my voice probably sounded a little different on that episode and then on this one. I apologize, I've been kind of sick the last couple of days. I think it's just due to the weather change. It happens to me like every fall, and then every spring I just get really bad allergies. So I'm just going to blame it on that. It's just been coughing, a lot of phlegm, and runny nose. So I don't think it's anything more severe than that. We had a wonderful Halloween, of course. Like I said, our friends are in town from Guatemala. We took their kids trick-or-treating. They've never been before because that's an American tradition. And they loved it so much. We have had just an amazing time with them. Also, something that is coming up is my husband's birthday. And we're planning a little something for it. That's all I'm going to say. Honestly, this may sound horrible, but honestly, I really don't care. I don't think he really listens to my episodes, and if he does, he doesn't say anything. So I don't want to say anything more, just in case. But there are some plans in the works. And yeah, that's all I'm going to say. His birthday is coming up. We're going to have a good time. I'm trying to figure out what we're going to do, but yeah, that's pretty much it. Other than that, I think I've lost like 3 more pounds, which is pretty good. I'm on track, y'all. And this whole time with friends being here, I have not been to the gym once, which is awful because I used to go every single day. It's just my time. I've been so busy with homework, my podcast, my volunteering stuff, student stuff, and making sure to spend time with them. So I just haven't been able to. Also, I've been kind of under the weather, so with being kind of sick, so yeah, I've mainly been a homebody. I haven't really wanted to get anyone else sick either, just in case. I posted pictures of the Halloween costumes. If you didn't guess, I was, as I call it, the godmother, because I'm the boss. Yeah, very lame, right? I actually went to Goodwill and I looked around for inspiration and I saw they had like a women's suit and I instantly thought, oh, I could be like a mobster. And it worked out perfectly because then I found a fedora. And then I went shopping for the chief editor, Augie, and found a prisoner costume. And I figured that would just fit perfectly, me being a mobster and him being my sidekick that's been convicted. So Augie also had a good time. He went trick-or-treating with us. He always enjoys going on walks. Everyone thought his costume was the cutest. And surprisingly, one home that we went to had a couple of dog treats. So that was really nice. So he actually did get some treats. And he didn't do a lot of tricks. Oh man, that was really lame. Okay, so today I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I know we've been doing a lot of the cult stuff, and I'll probably get back to that next week, but I started doing some research, and I thought, for those, since I've been so busy, I want to give a more simple case that I have to do a little bit of deep diving into, but not too much, because I want to give you more and better content for when I go over like the Manson family and things like that. So this one, it's titled the Tarasoff Case. And this case has been very controversial among mental health professionals. And why is that? You'll have to stick around to find out. I'm your host, Katie Gonzalez, and you're listening to What the Psychology. Okay, so I'm not going to actually tell you the reason why this is controversial right away, because I'm going to make you wait. I want to give you the whole story. This does involve crime, and it is the reason why in mental health it is controversial. And there's a reason why in this case, and you'll probably figure out as I go through the story, but in the end I'm going to give you like the full answer, and then you'll probably be like, oh, okay, yeah, I was right. Okay. At a 1968 folk dance in the mustard-colored auditorium at the University of California, Berkeley's International House, a young Indian man eyed a fair young Russian woman as she twirled to an ancient melody that was once part of a courtship ritual. The woman, Tanya Tarasoff, was then a 18-year-old student at Merritt College in Oakland, the daughter of Russian immigrants who moved first to Brazil and then to the United States. Tanya had lived in the States since she was about 14 years old, but her parents, they were very protective of her. They forbid her from wearing makeup, and she struggled against their strict rules. Typical teenager stuff, she would sometimes lie in order to do what she wanted, or waited until she was out of the house to apply her mascara. Honestly, I had rules when I was a teenager, but not so strict of you can't wear mascara. Actually, oh man, I'm going to reveal a lot about myself. I was kind of one of those kids that I had a group of friends, but none of us really fit into anywhere. We were kind of just like a group of friends. We weren't jocks, we weren't theater kids, we weren't really anything. We were all kind of different, but we were all friends since like elementary school, or since like people moved, and we kind of like were like, hey, be our friends. I liked a lot of people. I kind of mingled around. I mingled around with people that were theater, that were very artsy, that were very different. Popular people, it kind of depended on the person. We did have, well, I will say this about our school, is we had a lot of popular people that were very nice, very intelligent, and that were just friendly to everyone. But were also gifted at, things in leadership or academics or sports, whatever. However, there were those few bad pick of the litter that would just bully people. So those are the ones I tried to stay away from. But I was one of those kids where I was really, I'm not going to say was, because I kind of still am, into like heavy metal music and rock music. I wore like eyeliner below my lids, which I still do, but back then I wore it heavily. I would wear band t-shirts, and yeah, I was kind of like the emo kid, I guess, but not, I don't know. I guess you could define it as that, but my parents never restricted me on when wearing makeup up until like a certain age. Once I was in high school, it was kind of like, okay, but it wasn't like you can never wear makeup, and, it wasn't as authoritarian, which, in another episode, we'll probably talk about parenting styles, but my parents weren't really, like, that strict. Like, they had rules that were reasonable. They didn't have strict rules that were unreasonable, if that makes sense. But it could have also been the culture. I have noticed on my demographics of my podcast that I have international listeners, which I think is one of the coolest things ever. Like, how is someone from a totally different country listening to me here in the States talk to myself? But I'm not sure if I have anyone from Russia. If I do, please speak up and tell me. Like, I don't know if this was the culture back then, because remember, this was 68, whereas at the time here in the United States, things were more lax. More people were kind of like starting to be hippies and that whole thing. So I don't know how it was there. Let me check. I'm gonna see. But even if I don't have any Russian listeners, if I have any that's like close to that area or that may know more of the culture or even know the culture back then, I don't know if that was just her parents. It doesn't state what her parents' religion were, because I know sometimes that can be a factor. But anyways, they were very strict. She would struggle against their rules, especially about makeup, and she would put makeup on after she left the house. Now, the odd thing between makeup and, I guess, folk dancing, I don't know, this is my opinion, she was permitted to go to folk dances at the I House, which is the international house. But she actually went there to tutor Portuguese-speaking students in her free time, as long as her brother Alex drove her there and back. So it seems like she had freedom with dancing, but not wearing makeup. I don't know, I find that kind of odd because in some religions, they're very strict on dancing, and I guess maybe makeup too, but I digress. That's just my thoughts on that. Now, the student who had been staring off at Tanya was a 22-year-old Prozeki Podar. He's from India, so I'm horribly sorry if I pronounce the name wrong. Please correct me. He was a graduate student, which is very impressive at the age of 22, in naval architecture, and he lived at the I House. It's the international house. He also worked as an inspector of marine structures and built miniature model ships in his spare time. He seemed to Tarasoff kind of like an intense young man, but in fact he was unlike most other UC Berkeley students. He was very intelligent. He was from India. He was born there, and he was a member of the Dalit, or the untouchable class. Now, I'm going to explain this because I actually took I don't want to sound like, oh, I'm an expert because I took a class. But in the summer, I did take a introduction to religions class, and I remember about the caste system. So when I read this, I was like, the Dalit or untouchable class, I had no idea what that was because we didn't study that. So I had to actually look this up and figure out kind of what it was. In the Hindu class system, this usually isn't even taught because it's a group that is so low that they are considered beneath the 4 castes that make up the system. Now, the Manusmriti, it's widely regarded to be the most important and authoritative book on Hindu law, and it dated back to at least 1,000 years before Christ's birth, and it acknowledges and justifies the caste system as the basis of order and regularity of society. The caste system, it divides Hindus into 4 main categories. The Brahmins, which are like the preachers and the teachers. The Kshatriyas, which are the warriors or rulers. The Vaishyas, which is farmers, traders, and merchants. And then there's the Shudras, who are the laborers and they do menial tasks. So many people believe that the groups originated from Brahma, the Hindu god of creation. For centuries, the caste system actually dictated almost every aspect of Hindu religious and social life, and each group occupying a specific place in this complex hierarchy. Rural communities, they have long been arranged on the basis of castes. The upper and the lower almost always lived in segregated colonies. The water wells were never shared. And Brahmins would not accept food or drink from the Shudras. And no one could marry outside of their caste. This was how it was set. So he was part of the Untouchables, a class that was so low that they were just seen as outcasts. Like, they were so low that even today when they teach religion, they're not even considered an official caste in the caste system. However, I do want to note that, including Podar, he did fight incredible odds to leave home, and he ended up in a graduate program. Like, that's nearly impossible. There have been a few people in the Hindu caste system that have kind of broken out of that mold. So other people like him, there was the other people that are part of the Dalits and other low caste Indians, such as B.R. Ambedkar. He actually authored the Indian Constitution, and K.R. Narayanan. He actually became the nation's first Dalit president, and he risen to hold prestigious positions in the country. So, I mean, Yeah. People have proven that they can break out of it. And that's just how the culture was or is. I don't know if it's still that way. I honestly can't tell you. My Indian listeners, let me know and I can definitely update people on this. I don't really know much. I just know more of the religion portion. So, that's just kind of a brief. Of course, there's a lot more to the Hindu religion, but that's just the caste system, and that's kind of just shows you the overwhelming obstacles that Podar went through and the potential that he had. He had a lot of potential. So, Deborah Blum, she actually wrote a book or a article or something. It says Bad Karma, a true story of obsession and murder. Who do you think this is about? She said that Podar was one of only a handful of untouchables in the whole of India ever to leave for an American university. He beat the odds, you guys. He beat the odds to come here. Not only that, he got into a graduate program. And that's hard. I'm trying to get into a graduate program, and it's a lot of steps. Like, it's insane. I don't know if it was that hard back then, but I know nowadays it's pretty tough. So, the one thing, though, is he did struggle a lot with the culture shock when he landed in the Bay Area during the Summer of Love. Now, remember, during this time, everywhere around him, young people were throwing off cultural expectations in favor of radical experimentation. This included, like, with music, fashion, sex, drugs, all of those kind of things. So this actually really shocked him because he came from a completely different culture. So he would pretty much hide in his room. He would work on his own projects. He would just tune out all the chaos outside of his door. Just observing everything in his surroundings, it just completely caught him off guard. Now this kind of takes a turn. Not really, but really. When he first saw Tanya dancing the first time, when he laid eyes on her, he didn't even work up the nerve to talk to her until a later time. A later time where there was another folk dance event at the I House. Now Tanya, she was very interested in romantic love. She was curious about Podar, though she was breezy and non-committal in her early dealings with him. She was kind of like feeling the waters, trying to get to know him. So the two began to see each other here and there. They went out for pizza, went to the movies, common little dates here and there. But Podar, he came from a family, like I said, culture very different, where even casual sex was unheard of and arranged marriage was the norm. He never dated or really interacted with other women, like maybe besides his mom, and if he had siblings, but in the romantic sense, never. Now, in part because of his inexperience, and in part because of what would prove to be his profound mental instability, he misread a lot of the signs that, I guess, Tanya was giving off, or he perceived that she was giving off certain signs. Within weeks of meeting her, he had written to his parents back in their Bengal village, telling them details about her family, and especially about her and herself. She played accordion, she had won a seat at the university, and he actually wrote quite naturally, "The family looks to me to express my intentions." But in truth, Tanya knew nothing of his existence at this time. It's like, he saw her, he kind of fell in love, and then they kind of hung out here and there, and he was just obsessed, like he was infatuated automatically, and she was just kind of like feeling the waters a little bit. Sadly, however, Tanya would soon kind of change her mind about him a little bit. Her interest in him waned, and his affection for her only ramped up. Like, the more she kind of, I guess, walked away from him, the more he, like, wanted her. And he couldn't believe that the girl who had once seemed to like him now wouldn't commit to hanging out and didn't even really seem to look him in the eye. He continued to try to change her mind, showing up at her house, standing with her at her bus stop, and calling incessantly. Speaking of like their culture, you have to remember that usually it's an arranged marriage. And marriage is a big deal, guys, in whatever culture you're in. But you are supposed to be tied to that person for life. In all senses, that's kind of like the goal. And so he probably looked at this as a perception of, I really like her, she kind of likes me back, maybe we'll get married. And maybe that's kind of what he thought, but the culture here was so different where it's like, no, we pick who we want. We don't have to take things seriously at first. We can feel the water, see if we're compatible. Yeah. And if things don't work out, they don't work out, it's fine. But very, very different. Two different cultures, two different perspectives. So, unfortunately, like, his feelings, he kind of felt toyed by Tanya. And in these subsequent months, he sank into a deep depression. He would skip work, skip school. He would not leave his room. And he became very desperate to get Tanya's attention. And so he actually befriended her brother Alex, and Alex became his roommate. So twice, he actually angrily told coworkers that he would like to blow up Tanya's home, which is very extreme. And according to some accounts, he audio taped his conversations with Tanya, and he would play them back later for clues to her, I guess, her like toying with his emotions and stuff. Like, he was kind of torturing himself because she wasn't really that into him at first. Eventually, she did kind of come around. She began to spend more time with him, but she did not think of him as like a boyfriend or anything serious. She just really enjoyed the attention that he was giving her, but she was kind of freaked out occasionally. And when he showed her his journal, it was very detailed, and it recorded every minute, every second of their interactions, and had like really weird headings like taking my girlfriend to the King of Hearts. But unfortunately, she had a little sense that he was truly dangerous. And according to Blum's account, she would tell him he was crazy and urge him to relax. Yeah, I kind of would too. Like, dude, calm down. It doesn't have to be so serious at first. Like, let me try to get to know you, and then maybe we can be something more. But, whew, lordy. And you have to think, this was this guy's first, like, I guess, love. Like, he saw her and was instantly infatuated. So, that's no excuse for how things kind of go, but that is kind of like where his feelings are at. Eventually, at the instance of a friend of his, he did seek help at the campus mental health clinic, and he was treated by Dr. Larry Moore, and he was actually a rising star in psychiatry at the time, which is pretty cool. Moore was instantly concerned by the way that Potter spoke about Tanya, and he wondered a number of times whether he ought to breach doctor-patient confidentiality and tell someone about the increasingly deranged threats that he made in his office. At one point, Potter said that he planned to buy a gun and that he would like to murder Tanya, but as Blum writes, Moore thought that the best predictor of future violence was a history of past violence, and Potter didn't have any, past violence. So he kind of simply played Potter off as that his word wasn't really that good of committing those acts, and he just advised him to cease all communication with her. Now, Potter did agree, but then he stopped going to therapy after that. Not 2 months later, you guys, he showed up at her house, and when she asked him to leave, he said he needed to speak with her. So she shrieked, and he pulled out a pellet gun, which he promptly unloaded into her torso. So he walked back out onto the family's front lawn, and Tanya, screaming, lunged toward him. However, when she lunged toward him, he then pulled out a 13-inch butcher knife, and he stabbed her 8 times. And he later told police that he did that to shut her up. Wow. And then guess what? He walked into the house, called the police, and said, I just stabbed my girlfriend. Like, dude, she ain't your girlfriend. She don't want you. When police arrived, he said calmly, "Handcuff me, I killed her." Tanya was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. Potter was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 5 years. But following an appeal, a new judge agreed to release him on the condition that he'd be deported to India. He returned to Calcutta. He married and had a child. That's crazy. Like, you killed this young, beautiful girl. She was a free spirit. And she was your friend. Like, dude, she didn't want to be more than that, but at least you had her friendship, I guess. Like, you took a life, and then you were able to not even really serve jail time, but go back home and then find another person and marry them and then have a kid. Ugh. So Tanya's parents were pretty pissed, and I don't blame them one bit. They actually sued the university mental health professors, especially Larry Moore, because he had known about his plans, and he did report it to campus police, but not the family. I guess at the time, the law, there was no obligation. That's the biggest controversy about this case. So they brought a wrongful death suit against the Regents of University of California. The case did go to the California Supreme Court, which did rule in 1976 that it is a therapist's moral and professional obligation to report threats like Potter's in order to protect threatened individuals. Some members of the medical community argued that the decision would chip away at the entire practice of psychotherapy, of which confidentiality is thought to be the cornerstone, but the majority of decision was clear, and it has saved lives in the 40 or so states in which it is codified in law or upheld through precedent. As Justice Matthew O. Tolbrenner wrote in the decision, the protective privilege ends where the public peril begins. During the court case, they pretty much rejected the therapist's claim that he owned no duty to the woman because she was not his patient, and held that if a therapist determines or reasonably should have determined that a patient poses a serious danger of violence to others, that they do bear a duty to exercise reasonable care to protect the foreseeable victim of that danger. So this law pretty much provides people in the mental health field, or even medical field, I would say, that they have a duty to protect or warn a third party only if the therapist actually believes or predicts that the patient poses a serious risk of inflicting serious bodily harm upon a reasonable, identifiable victim. And recently the rule was expanded by a California appeals court in 2 lawsuits stemming from a murder-suicide. So pretty much today, if a therapist does have reason to believe these claims that their patient is going to commit a crime, harm another person, they do have the obligation to report it to authorities and to protect whoever that victim will be. And nowadays, it's actually a crime not to do that. Whereas back in the day, it was kind of an up in the air thing. Like, there was no law saying that they should or shouldn't. So now it is a standard feature of psychiatric care. So this does conclude a major change in the doctor-patient confidentiality agreement. I don't know if people know much about the duty to warn, but because they do still want you to freely talk. And what's cool is I learned about this case in class, like in my clinical psychology class. I never knew that this was like a thing. Like, I mean, I knew that confidentiality wasn't a full-blown thing in mental health. Like, I knew under certain conditions, they can't keep full confidentiality in circumstances as such as this one. So this case, it did set the legal precedent. And I think a lot of people don't know that confidentiality is not absolute. I think most people outside of the mental health profession, they probably assume that therapists hold all information confidential. But, of course, in cases like this, that's not the case. Now, another big problem that we run into today in the field from kind of what I've been reading is that different states, they have adopted different interpretations of the rules and precedents created by this case and others similar to it. So some states require the breaking of confidentiality in situations where other states, they allow it, but they don't require it. States, they also differ on their definitions of a warning and what should trigger it. In some states, rules even mention that the protecting the client could take the form of intensified treatment or hospitalization of the client without notifying them, while other states' rules make no such mention. In our little clinical psychology book, there has been a recent dilemma kind of going on. In recent decades, I'll say. A lot of clinical psychologists, they have faced a version of the duty to warn decision regarding clients with like HIV/AIDS. So imagine that if you are a psychologist and you have this young 30-year-old single HIV positive client that is seeing you, and they're seeing you for like depressive symptoms. During the course of their conversation, they mention that they've been sexually active and that they sometimes engage in sexual activity that could put their partner at risk, and that he has withheld this information from his partner about him being HIV positive. So now the questions come, does his behavior constitute a threat worthy of a warning for the potential victim? How does it compare with Podor's threat to kill Tanya? If he breaks confidentiality to warn a potential victim, what effect will that have on the therapeutic alliance with Paul and ultimately on that client's well-being? Who does the psychologist have a primary obligation to? Is it Paul, the client, or someone that he might endanger? And unfortunately for many clinical psychologists and therapists, there are no easy answers to this question. There really isn't. So, I don't know, just leaves you something to think about. So, well, now you know that you can't be fully confidential to therapists. I mean, you can if you're not threatening the lives of other people. Now, I will say this is different in terms of the American military. I know for us, we have chaplains, and you are literally allotted full confidentiality to them, which I guess puts up the question of, should duty to warn be applied to them as well? Like, what would make that change? Would it have to be the case of someone making threats? But I also think that in the military, we have other access to things more quickly. Like, if you were to make a threat, they could quickly take you to, like, mental health, or they could take you to the hospital, and be with you and make sure nothing happens. They have more obligation to kind of escort you and stay by your side. And I think that's what is different about military versus civilian. But I know most chaplains, that's how they handle those type of situations. If it comes up to something like that, then they make sure that they do not let that person leave. They leave with them. They give them help right away. I don't know, it's just another question to ponder on. So what do you think about the Tarasoff case? Man, what a tragedy. Such a tragedy. And if this was put in place at the time, she probably wouldn't be dead. And that's the biggest tragedy of it all. That these laws, these things weren't thought of at that time to protect other people. But like the questions arise, who is your duty to? Is it to your patient? Is it to who they could harm? How will that affect your relationship with them? Will they be grateful that you reported them and got them help, or will they be pissed off? And then maybe now you're their next target. Just some things to think about. Well, I am your host, Katie Gonzalez, and you've been listening to What the Psychology. Stay psyched, y'all.